You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible.
Acting Department of Homeland Secretary Kevin McAleenan announced on Friday that for the first time they are focused on addressing the threat of white nationalism coming from within the borders of the United States. This is good news for national security and extremist experts who for years and with increasing urgency have sounded the alarm about the threat of white nationalist terror. Last week, the House Oversight Joint Subcommittee held a hearing on confronting white supremacy. The panel included, of all people, conservative pundit Candace Owens, who said it's not an issue. But here are a few comments from some of the more credible panelists.
Ms. Mulligan, what concerns do you have about white supremacist extremism in the ranks of law enforcement and intelligence communities? And I will add that I come from a law enforcement family, so nothing against law enforcement.
So it's clear that that the threat of violent white supremacy is not limited to those who are outside of our law enforcement and national security communities. You mentioned law enforcement and police departments. I think another place where we see signs of radicalization that are troubling is actually in our active duty and returning members of the military. And I think one of the things that makes it quite difficult to address is that those are the people who are supposed to be keeping us safe. And we should have absolutely no tolerance for those types of ideologies in law enforcement, in the intelligence community, in any part of the federal government, to include the military. And I do believe that most of those types of employment situations have rules and regulations that prohibit it. The question is whether they're being adequately enforced, and I think that more should be done in that arena.
We look at existing counterterrorism strategies and have to wonder whether they take into account the rise of white supremacy. As we see white supremacy further penetrating the American consciousness of some in our country. I guess it is really Dr. Geltzer who I should direct this question to. How does the fact that white supremacy is so much more mainstream, if I can use that word, I don't want the American public to think we think that they have bought into this, but I'll use that, more mainstream, at least than Islamic jihadism. How does that change the way we think about it in national security terms?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I think the emergence of white supremacism, as you say, not at all as a mainstream view, but instead as something of increasing significance as a threat and a national security threat, I think that needs to get reflected in the strategies that ultimately guide resources and priorities for the counterterrorism pieces of the U.S. government.
Do you see it reflected yet?
Probably insufficiently, but my hope is that we're moving and that we will accelerate moving in a better direction. So going back to last year's National Strategy for Counterterrorism, there was at least explicit reference to it, and I give the administration strategy credit for including that acknowledgement.
Last year's what, I'm sorry?
Last year's National Strategy for Counterterrorism.
Yes.
Now today, as I believe the chairman mentioned earlier, today the Department of Homeland Security is anticipated to release its own strategy implementing, showing how that department in particular will implement that broader whole of government strategy. And my understanding is that the Department of Homeland Security will be explicit about this nature of the threat, and I think that's an important step forward to do so, because 9/11 drove home, it was obvious after 9/11, the importance of acting against jihadism. Here, we need something that drives that home, not just to the American people, but also to the parts of government that answer to those strategy documents.
Well, it's certainly about time that we start to consider white supremacy as the terroristic entity that it is. And to join me on the panel today to talk about this is Erica Savage Wilson, host of Savage Politics podcast, Derek Holley, president of Reaching America, and Joanna LeBlanc, of a national security and foreign affairs legal analyst. I'm ready for this discussion, but it took so long to get here. I mean, what are your thoughts about this hearing that they've had and that they're starting to have? Do you think this is enough, and where do we need to go from here?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think centuries, and I do mean centuries of lynchings, of torture, the killings of black bodies and indigenous bodies definitely can prove that. You know, listen, white nationalism has always been a terroristic threat to this United States, these United States of America.
Absolutely.
Especially to black communities. And so kind of the slow dragging that we're doing around strategies and things of this nature, we're at a place right now where the executive branch of government has completely submitted and laid out a plan around white supremacy. And so black bodies, brown bodies, we're at an even more heightened sense of awareness. And so to be very honest with you, this is a conversation that's almost kind of like a late entry. And especially the way it's been categorized, that since 9/11, and then kind of like bringing it into conversations around jihadis and things of that nature, where this has always been a threat to the very citizenry of this country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they don't want to talk about white terrorism unless they somehow glean it onto what they perceive as the real terrorism, Muslim terroristic action.
Absolutely. And if I could add just very briefly, that also, you know, just this weekend, we had a member of the military who was on a phone call with the undercover FBI agent talking about bombing, and when specifically asked about action that they could take within Texas, this U.S. military member responded he wasn't very sure, but that he did have, you know, an idea of a candidate that could be taken out, a presidential candidate, that could actually cause a little bit of controversy, so to speak. And I'm very much so paraphrasing it. This happened September 20th. The arrest was made on September 21st. So we're talking about things that are active. They might not be above the fold, but we are talking about people who are aligning themselves with far-right movements and using the military and other departments as a vehicle to make those things happen.
Absolutely. So, Joanna, when you look at what we've done as a nation in terms of being very specific and very aggressive when it comes to rooting out terroristic activity that we believe comes from outside of the United States, you know, what do you think? Why do you think we fall so short when it comes at looking at what's happening and what's really been birthed and grown and comes into fruition right on these shores?
Sure. I like to give this conversation a little bit of context. So from 2002, I believe, up until 2017, the United States government spent roughly $2.8 trillion in counterterrorism efforts, in particular the Iraq War, and ensuring organizations like Al-Shabaab and Hamas don't have access to our shores and can't commit any crimes over here in the United States, which is all great to know that we have a country where we spend so much money in our military to ensure that we are protected to prevent external threats from happening in the United States. But however, there is this white nationalism, which is a threat to American democracy. We look at what happened in Charlottesville, where people died, and I always say this, one die is one too many.
Right.
But as much as I would like to criticize the administration, not only this administration, but previous administrations, for not having made white nationalism a threat, a homegrown terrorism issue. But we have to give credit to the Department of Homeland Security for even initiating the conversation around white nationalism. Now, the question to me is, how much money is going to be put aside to ensure that we properly fight white nationalism? We can have all the conversation we want, but unless funds are allocated properly to properly fight this problem that we have in society, to me, it's just conversation.
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, right at the beginning of this administration, there actually was money allocated to address the threat of white nationalism in America. And the very first thing that this administration did was to gut that program out. I mean, they made a very concerted effort with this particular administration to say, we are going to look the other way. I would argue largely because they know those are some of their political supporters. What do you think is, yes?
Another thing to look at is for America to actually, as a whole, say, you know what, white nationalism is an issue, will be, to a certain extent, indict the system.
Right, exactly.
Because we know we have some of those quote-unquote white nationalists who are wearing robes, who are judges, who are police officers, who are teachers, who are our principals and such. So as a society, we have to be careful how we frame things, especially when it comes to white nationalism, because you don't want to indict the entire system. So something that you kind of think about, but you know, most people may not, but nonetheless, I think that's a way to look at it.
I think that's why we're so reluctant to do it. But what do you think? Are we just giving too much deference to white fragility? That's how I would term this.
I would say that I agree with most of everything you guys said, that it's been an issue for a long time, and it's been overlooked. But I would say that the one thing is, I don't think it's a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a national issue. Like I said, it's been existed for a long time. And you go back, you know, a lot of what we experience right now comes from as a result of the Civil War.
Yes.
And so, after the Civil War, during the Civil War, there was only a certain amount of white people who owned slaves, the rich white people. Most of the people in the South didn't own slaves. So, but in order to buy into the myth to fight, it was actually the great myth, which still exists today, that white people are superior to blacks. And again, that, I think it's more covert right now because we see it in the workplace, we see it in the court system, we see it in the media. And so I think it's an issue that needs to be dealt with. I applaud this administration or the Homeland Security for bringing this to the light right now, because it should have been done a long time ago. But I think we need to shine the light on a whole, and we just can't call it a one-sided, because you look at organizations like Antifa. Okay, so they're bringing damage.
Who have they killed?
Right here in Washington, D.C., they came here to wreck this city.
Who have they killed?
I can't point to anyone that
they haven't killed anybody.
They have beat up a lot of people, though.
But they have zero murders. I really think that. Do you know what Antifa is short for?
I don't, but I know that they go around wrecking stuff.
Antifa is short for anti-fascist.
Right.
That's what that organization stands for. So do we want to be pro-fascist?
Well, I don't think we want to be anti-fascist either. I mean, not when you go around beating up people in the streets just because they're reporting the media, and that just happened out in California.
I think that's a slight mischaracterization of what happened there. What you had there was you had Proud Boys individuals which is a right-wing, racist, violent organization that specifically goes, I'm not twisting, I'm telling you what happened. What happened was you had an organization called the Proud Boys. Are you familiar with that organization?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with that is a white, right-wing, racist, and violent organization that specifically goes to cities to start violent interaction.
And do you realize that organization, they pay these people to show up at these protests, to do that?
Which ones are you talking about now?
All these protests, these people are paid protesters.
Are you talking about the Proud Boys?
The Proud Boys, and a lot of these people at these protests are paid, because I know that I haven't participated, but I've gone to different hearings and such, and the people that show up at these hearings have been paid to be there. I've even written op-eds about this. There's an organization out in California that you go to their website right now, and they will tell you that they run ads on Craigslist to get people to come out and protest. They've even taken this model over to Europe to do the same thing, to pay people to protest.
They also pay people to fill Trump rallies.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's just say that this is a common thing on the right, but it's, go ahead.
No, I mean, like, this is not, that's a playbook that's used by all. And to get back to the Antifa piece, I think that's kind of a lot of one of those talking points, so to speak, that gets thrown into conversations to really thwart the larger narrative. The larger narrative being that to be a black body is to always be in a state of being policed.
Yes.
And that with that comes other pieces that really do impact our community. And so for a department that's less than 20 years old, that was born out of, you know, us giving up some certain level of rights in order for this department to be founded and to produce this level of report, you say that that's applaudable, that's good, but this is a conversation that has much larger implications to what absolutely is the bread and the heartbeat of our country. And so in that, I'm just saying that we have to be very, very mindful, because this is being broadcast to other minds and ears, that at the heart of this is right-wing white supremacy
No, see, I
and
don't agree with
nationalism.
that. I don't agree
and
with
that
that
has
part.
a huge impact on when we're talking about how Trump has to date now installed 152 judges, 99 of those in the district courts, and you're talking about 40 plus that are in the appeals court. That has an impact on those very same groups of people. So to keep a group that doesn't cause the level of violence, that doesn't cause people to be shot, killed, and continuing to abuse a community, let's put it in the right context. That is at the hand of people who have submitted to a right-wing manifesto.
So, Joanna, I'm going to bring Joanna into this because exactly when we think about, for example, the murderer in El Paso and the manifesto that he wrote, which sounded like talking points from any Trump speech that I can imagine.
But he was a Democrat, though, Doc.
But we're talking about, we're not throwing parties into this. We're talking about a system that is seeking supreme reign, period.
That's why I said
that doesn't have a party affiliation.
I said that at the beginning.
And it doesn't have a religious affiliation either.
I said that at the beginning. It has nothing to do with a party.
But you brought a group into this conversation.
So y'all brought the group into it.
No. You said Antifa first. None of us brought out Antifa, that piece. What I'm saying is redirecting the conversation and the basis of this report, which is long overdue, to those people who are actively behind and pushing this, which are right-winged organization folks that have submitted to people that have submitted to white supremacy, and they are at all levels and branches of government. That is why they talk about.
And there's a reason why it didn't say right wing.
Absolutely.
Let's just get real about it.
This is,
absolutely, and let's also acknowledge that there is a false equivalency. Let's just be very real. There's a false equivalency to say that Antifa is equal to the Proud Boys, is equal to the Klan, is equal to these white supremacist organizations that have murdered people in this country for centuries. And I agree. Obviously, if you have white supremacist organizations that go back decades and decades and decades, it's beyond any political party. But as we see where we are today, in terms of the sort of white supremacist ilk, and where they typically stand in terms of who they support politically, it is no accident that you have Proud Boys organizing trips to Trump rallies. I don't see them lining up to vote for people, for Democrats. So, I mean, Joanna, what do you think about, where we stand with this particular sort of equivalence between Antifa, who has murdered 0 people? Let's just put that out there. I mean, it's really insulting. It's really... Oh, really? Really? Okay, that we know of. But we know, how many do we know of that white supremacists have murdered? How many do we know of? That's right. It probably is more than we can count.
I don't know.
So that's like an excuse to say that because if we know of hundreds of people throughout the history of this nation, if not thousands, thousands of people, what I can tell you every day that you are ignoring is the fact that white supremacists throughout the founding of this nation has murdered thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Black and Indian people and others as well. And we just saw what happened. And we just saw what happened. But we have not seen the equivalent. And this is what happens all the time. When people want to make excuses for white violence, when people want to make excuses for white violence by trying to put trying to sort of lay blame with another organization that they see as counter to that is seeking to defend people who are under assault. That is the entire point of that organization.
Okay, Doc.
Yes.
I don't think we can necessarily compare the two. I don't even know how Antifa got caught up in this conversation.
Because it's a false equivalency. That's what it is.
Because it's just, you can't connect the nexus. Just can't, not in this context at least. But you said something earlier that we should not applaud the administration for doing this. And I will respectfully disagree, and this is the reason why. This is an administration that has been plagued with the narrative of being racist, of being anti-immigrant, anti-Blackness, anti-minorities, right? Anti those of groups that are considered to be disadvantaged, quote unquote, right? The Secretary of Homeland Security is appointed by the President of the United States, as we know. So for the Secretary to have taken this position, I think it has to be the same sort of belief with the President of the United States. The Secretary would not have announced that white nationalism is an issue without the support of his boss. Now, some could argue that.
Let's see how long it is before he's fired.
Some could argue. Let's see
how long he keeps that job. I will start the clock right now.
some could argue that the reason why this decision was made is because elections right around the corner.
Right.
In an effort to get support from minorities and those who have been impacted by white nationalists and white supremacy in America.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think that we should applaud the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security for taking this bold step to call white nationalism what it is and to address it as homegrown terrorism in the United States.
It's hard, and I'll stand flat-footed to say, and I hear you, I disagree. And so then let me forward that and then title it a regime. And so I do not applaud them because in this current place that we're at, this again is an overdue conversation, and the assaults are steadily coming. And so, you know, kind of like giving somewhat of a semblance of normalcy connection to this happening doesn't work for me. So.
Well, I will just say that when you bring in Candace Owens to say, essentially in blackface, that white supremacy does not exist, I have a hard time believing that there is any sincerity around really wanting to root out white nationalism in this nation.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, November 7th through 11th, we're going to be in Los Cabos, Mexico, for the Life Luxe Jazz, the second annual Life Luxe Jazz experience. It's going to be phenomenal. We're going to have, of course, great music over 4 days, golf and spa. We're going to sit here and, man, you talk about food, you talk about libations, also known as liquor. It's going to be loads of fun. So while people are freezing in the Northeast, let's go hang out in Mexico. I'm going to be doing Roland Martin Unfiltered from there that Thursday and Friday in front of a studio audience. Y'all can all come join us. So come hang out with me and so many others. It's going to be absolutely great, of course. We're going to be at Day Club Los Cabos, nestled on the Sea of Cortez. They're in Los Cabos. The great people we got lined up for you, folks. Amazing. Of course, comedian and actor Mark Curry. Of course, Gerald Albright, my frat brother, Alex Bouillon, Raul Madan, Incognito, Pieces of a Dream, Kirk Whalum, Average White Band. We're going to have the gospel experience with Donnie McClurkin, Shalea, Roy Ayers, Tom Brown, Ronnie Laws, Ernest Quarles. Some new hotels have opened up. For more information, go to lifeluxejazz.com. That's lifeluxejazz.com, lifeluxejazz.com. You want to book it now, of course, to get your package, but also you want to have much cheaper airfare as well. And so, trust me, it's going to be an absolute fun time. I cannot wait to go, and trust me, you want to do it as well. lifeluxejazz.com. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.